Have you ever watched a series of movies back to back, like The Fast and the Furious, Nightmare on Elm Street, even the Werewolf games? Anything that just has a lot of entries in it. Or, more likely, have you ever seen a YouTube video, like a series, where someone reviews a series in films, whether it's in parts or one very long video like the ones done by the Cinema Snob or Dr. Jordan Breeding? If you've done either of these things, then you may have noticed that no matter how much the quality holds, you start to grow tired of the premise. It's made even worse when you have to do it multiple times to take notes and try to keep accurate in order to make content. I bring this up because that's where I was when I started Forbidden Fruit. Now let me be clear, the Tomie series of movies has held up pretty well. They haven't gotten too ridiculous, the writing and pacing of them has held up film to film. I still recommend each and every one, but maybe palate cleanse between them. Anyway, I was really beginning to approach Tomie burnout when I noticed something on the title card of this movie. This movie is called Tomie, the Final Chapter, Forbidden Fruit. Now, if there's three things I know about horror movies, it's this in order. 1. Jason is the killer in every Friday the 13th. 2. There are always 2 Ghostface killers in Scream. And 3. Any horror movie titled The Final Chapter is always the final entry in a franchise. So seeing these words, they filled me with determination. We're gonna start the new year with the final Tomie film. So, one last time for those who don't know, Tomie is the story of a schoolgirl / immortal demon named Tomie Kawakami, who is entirely irresistible to men and insatiable in her need to use them. This almost always ends with her being violently killed, but she's capable of regenerating her body, allegedly even from a speck of dust, like a less sexy Wolverine. She can also create copies of herself that operate completely autonomous of one another, but that doesn't come up in this movie, so we're not going to deal with it. If you've ever met someone who also watches Japanese horror movies and talked to them about Forbidden Fruit, you may have heard about it referred to as the gay one, like Nightmare on Elm Street 2, because, yeah, this time the main protagonist is another schoolgirl who is also named Tomie, but her last name is Hashimoto, which is what I'll be referring to her as for the purpose of clarity going forward. Now, I'll preface this by saying that this is actually a pretty good movie. The pacing is much tighter than last time, at barely 90 minutes long. There's less violence in this one, but the little there is more interesting than it has been. I will say that it's a little less tense than Rebirth was overall, and it has a unusual age dynamic going on, and I don't just mean between the girls, even though that has some Twilight level implications to it, but I'll get to that when we get there. For now, let's start at the beginning. One more time. We start with 2 men going to investigate an abandoned apartment, apparently left by someone who had been bringing a girl there regularly. But the moment they enter the apartment, they find the man's corpse hanging from the rooftop. The manager leaves to get the police, but the other man remains and finds bloody tools in the apartment. When the corpse seemingly comes back to life to tell him that he won't give her to him. He's then haunted by feminine laughing until he opens the closet to find the remains of Tomie. The man cries out her name as we go to title. We then open with a group of girls carrying a scarecrow in a shot that I swear to God I have seen somewhere before, but I cannot for the life of me figure out where. If you know, please let me know. They use it for target practice as one of the girls has a crossbow for reasons that will never be made clear. And these girls are discussing the legend of Tomie and end up comparing it to Sadako from The Ring. Hashimoto arrives, having been sent to buy them snacks, but after getting the wrong one, is punished by being made to hold the snack cake up as a target before being shot by the crossbow. The girls laugh at this murder until it's revealed that it was a suction cup arrow that was fired. Despite what Hashimoto will tell you in this scene, her name is not Amber, and this line did not cause me to look up if I had gotten bad subs. It'll be kind of revealed later, but this is a fanfic that Hashimoto writes about in her head about an emo vampire lady. She continues monologuing in her head as she wanders around a jewelry shop. She sees a cross that she really likes but she can't afford, so she begins to leave it behind till a mysterious woman places it around her neck and then leads her out of the shop. This lady is revealed to be the titular Tomie, who promptly takes Hashimoto's glasses and tosses them, saying that she's prettier without them. We then join Hashimoto at home and learn that her mother has passed, and it's been rough on her and her dad, even though it was roughly 10 years ago. As she makes her way to school the next day, she's hassled by the other girls for wearing contacts, before being bullied into going out with them and paying for their karaoke. It's not all bad, though. as that weekend Tomie is going to visit her. So Hashimoto gets her dad out of the house, but the two cross paths as he's leaving, and the dad seems to recognize Tomie. Once he does leave though, Tomie begins to do nothing but talk shit about Hashimoto's house, along with her room and pretty much all of her interests. Weirdly, this is the bitchiest we see Tomie outside of when she drops her character and just starts physically attacking people. After that severe round of negging, Tomie then proceeds to kiss Hashimoto before finding her fanfic writing and reading it aloud. And if I'm being honest, it's not bad. It's not high art or anything, but for a high school girl writing about love and depression, it's pretty good from the excerpts that are read aloud. Hashimoto goes to make tea while Tomie continues reading in her room, and upon returning, Tomie has it read to her while she listens. Upon realizing that in the story, they're eating a person, Tomie offers to give Hashimoto the chance to eat one herself. Hashimoto's dad returns home to find Tomie alone, but before he can ask anything, Tomie begins to comment on how he must have been happy to marry someone else, and even have a child without her, before commenting on how she won't forgive him and storms out. Hashimoto accuses him of doing something to Tomie and runs to her room. The next day, however, Tomie tells her not to worry about what happened, and instead they go to have a picnic in the park, where she feeds Hashimoto, quote, human meat, unquote, but it's just pomegranate. Hashimoto then talks about all the things that she likes about Tomie, from her legs, to her eyes, to the beauty mark just outside of them. And Tomie has her lick her fingertip in what I imagine a lot of very sheltered people found shockingly homoerotic at the time. They watch the sunset, and when Hashimoto professes that she would die for Tomie, Tomie simply responds that she was here long before Hashimoto, and she'll be here long after she dies. We then join Hashimoto's dad, who works with freezing things in large blocks of ice. It looks like that's what the company does. As he leaves work though, Tomie runs into him and explains that she's the same Tomie from when he was young and found her corpse in that apartment. She's upset that he married someone else after proclaiming his love for her. We're treated to a flashback where Kazu, dad, was waiting for Tomie and ended up getting NTR'd. Don't look that up if you don't know. But she's back here and now to rekindle their love. And this is where my weird issue with this movie comes in. So, Tomie is an ancient, borderline eldritch monstrosity given form that passes for a high schooler. This is weird and gross in all the versions in an Edward Cullen kind of way, but whatever. It's never come up before this film because she's always dated people who seemed appropriate for her, and generally only one. Like, she never pretended to be a high school student and dated a 30-year-old. If she was dating a man, she was clearly a grown-up woman who wasn't in school. If she was dating a high schooler, she went to school with them. She always seemed to adapt to the age of her target. What's happening in this film, though, is that one Tomie is currently seducing both a high school girl and a middle-aged man at the same time. Even if we ignore the Deep South aspect that Hashimoto has made out with her potential future mom, this is such a weird aspect of her juggling generations that never really been brought up before, and I don't know why it really bothers me in this one. But back on topic, Kazu ends up burning everything that remained of his late wife, including her shrine, much to Hashimoto's dismay. Tomie then hangs out with him as he begins working out to get back to being youthful and strong for her. That night, Hashimoto wakes up to find her yard door open and Kazu standing silent in the yard like it's paranormal activity. She's interrupted though by a call from Tomie saying that she'll be sleeping over tomorrow, and it's revealed that her dad has been holding a knife the entire time. At said sleepover, Tomie is inspired by Hashimoto's writing to tie her to the bed in a scene on par with the sickest BDSM scenes from 50 Shades of Grey. That's right, I saw all of those movies, and not for content. It was to win an argument, but not about this. Tomie then turns off the lights and leaves to probably bang Hashimoto's dad. She does actually go to find Kazu, but for a different kind of insertion. She wants him to insert a knife between his daughter's ribs. She convinces him to do it with the promise that once Hashimoto is gone, they'll go back to the way that they used to be. They make their way to Hashimoto's room, but on the way there, Kazu snaps out of it and proceeds to brain Tomie with a hand axe. He then takes her corpse to the ice building and uses an industrial saw to cut up her body before tossing it in a lake. Hashimoto has actually been tied this entire night. She wakes up the next day and manages to free herself, but Tomie somehow returns to their house first, and Kazu begins to strangle her before it's revealed that he's actually strangling killing his daughter. Kazu reveals to her everything about who and what Tomie was. And Hashimoto surprisingly seems pretty accepting about it, except she ends up going to look at the body dumping site and stumbles upon Tomie's severed head before taking it home with her in a bag. That's right, everybody, we've circled all the way back to the opening of the first movie. Time is a flat circle. Hashimoto tries to take care of the head the best she can, but runs into Suzuki, an old workmate of her dad's, who asks her out to dinner, like on a date. What is going on with this movie? Like, the scene has nothing to do with anything. Suzuki shows up once later and never again. Jesus. She declines and he walks away, so that works out at least. Upon returning home, Kazu almost murders Hashimoto again, and it's revealed that he hasn't been eating or sleeping, really. Instead, he lives in a paranoid state with a weapon in hand at all times. We get some weird body horror that I'm not sure YouTube will allow me to show you. It's not sexual in any way, but it's definitely hella weird. This leads to a really funny moment of Hashimoto taking Tomie out in a stroller, and while she's resting, an old lady looks into it, expecting a baby, and instead receives Tomie telling her not to look at her. The bully girls from school return and notice Hashimoto pushing a stroller in town, but when they go to investigate the hiding place, they find a rude drawing calling them cows instead. Hashimoto has taken Tomie and fled to the city. She, however, did not actually plan for anything, as she now has no money and no home. She gets offered a job selling her body, but refuses. Surprisingly, Tomie convinces her to rob a bank instead. Hashimoto walks in terrified and simply ends up withdrawing about $500. Upon checking on her, Hashimoto finds that Tomie is growing a second malformed face on her body and doesn't know what to do. She waits until Tomie falls asleep and then takes her to a rooftop where she confesses that she can't take care of Tomie, so instead they'll die together. However, Tomie decides to use this time to instead talk about how Hashimoto's dad loves her more than his own daughter, and she's going to haunt them both forever. Begins just thrashing in Hashimoto's arms, who actually accidentally drops her off the roof. As she breaks down, the bully girls from school have decided to visit Hashimoto's house. Unfortunately, they bump into Kazu, and when they tell him that they're here to kill Tomie, his daughter, he thinks they're talking about Tomie, so he comments that he's already killed her and thrown her in the river. They brush him off, but when he asks what they intend to do to her, they answer, leading him to immediately crack one of them in the head with a pipe he's been carrying around. They panic and start to flee, but he corners the other two and begins to beat one as she crawls towards the exit. The last girl starts to blame the others for all of them bullying Hashimoto and pisses herself before Kazu just cracks her head open too. He then catches up to the crawling girl like the dickest Dead by Daylight killer and scares her into falling into a glass door. The girls are alive but hurt and flee the house, when Tomie actually does return to the house to reunite with Kazu. Hashimoto immediately puts an end to that shit with a crossbow bolt to the neck. They then decide that if she really can't be killed, she has to be stopped another way. They encase her in a block of ice and just sit there, watching her while eating chips and bonding. However, Kazu breaks down almost immediately and frees her from the block. He just as quickly turns on his daughter, and together, he and Tomie lock her in the deep freezer to die while they go off to live happily ever after. Luckily, she's rescued early the next day when Suzuki comes in. This is the only other time he shows up in the movie, for work, and it's revealed that her dad changed the temperature so that she would survive. We jump ahead a bit in time, and Hashimoto, living home alone, gets a call with no one on the other end. She assumes it's her dad and thanks him for saving her life. We then join her in writing her stories one last time, writing a story about how this time she'll make a good friend, one she can trust and tell everything to, before opening her drawer and revealing Tomie's severed ear, already growing into another body. We go to credits. So, how do I feel about the final entry into the Tomie film series? It's really good, actually. I know I sound a bit snippy about it, but this is also the 5th time I've watched it, and I'm gonna have to sit through it at least one more time for the edit. But honestly, it's a solid entry and a great ending. Hashimoto does a good job as a loner girl who becomes infatuated with a pretty girl who shows her attention but isn't driven to the violent ends that all men in her past are. Kazu is a good man who wants to be a good father, but is facing something he can't understand or overcome. While Tomie is seemingly at her cruelest, only twice showing the cutesy act she does with most guys, one of which is cut out quickly by a shot to the neck. She is also genuinely supportive of Hashimoto's writing and does help Kazu get back into shape. I do think it's a bittersweet ending, and that both of them don't learn anything from this. They instead continue to rely on Tomie. Kazu will eventually kill and then be killed by Tomie, as all men are, and who knows what'll happen to Hashimoto, but if I had to guess, she too will eventually be murdered. It's a strong ending, though, and definitely a worthwhile send-off to a Japanese horror icon like Tomie. If I'm being honest, though, I'm glad I'm done with it. I think I'm gonna step away from series for a little while. If there's a new entry in the werewolf game or something like that, I'll make sure to get into it, but for now, I'm gonna spend some time with some one-off horror movies, and maybe even some other stuff. We'll see. See if it refills my energy tank, you know? This is episode 1 from the year of 24. I love you all. Good night. Maybe you think you're safe. Maybe you're dreaming of